For a long time, people have said that the railroads built America. But you have rarely been shown the financial machine hidden behind the tracks, the federal lands, and the investor congressman. Ready to follow, dollar by dollar, how public money was diverted into one of the most explosive schemes of the 19th century? In the mid-19th century, America was rumbling. The ground shook, not under the hooves of horses, but under the weight of a dream. To link the Atlantic to the Pacific with a line of steel. The country was bleeding in the Civil War. Armies clashed, flags were torn apart. But behind the smoke of battle, another war was being waged in silence. A war of numbers, contracts, and signatures. A war for control of time, space, and money. We are in the 1850s, 1860s. The country stretches westward like an unfinished colossus. In the east, cities hum with banks, newspapers, courthouses. In the west, empty space, plains, mountains, deserts. Between the two, waiting. Wagon trains move slowly. Stagecoaches get bogged down. Convoys lose their way. Time is long. Distances kill. The economy wants to move faster than the dust of the trails. At the heart of Washington, in the dark rooms of Congress, voices rise. Maps are spread across tables. Red lines trace imaginary routes through the Rockies, the plains of Nebraska, the deserts of Utah. Debates follow, are postponed, taken up again. Then comes the moment when words become law. On July 1st, 1862, Abraham Lincoln signs. His solemn hand commits the state to an endeavor that goes beyond men. The Pacific Railroad Act is born. A law simple in appearance, but loaded with terrible power. It sets the conditions for the birth of the transcontinental railroads. Two names stand out immediately in the text. Union Pacific Railroad, to go from east to west. Central Pacific Railroad, to carve its route from California into the interior of the continent. Between them, a future junction point, still invisible, already mythical. The federal government places itself at center stage. It does not build itself. It pays. It promises. It guarantees. It offers the companies what few nations have ever dared to hand over to private hands. Flows of debt, vast lands, quasi-sovereign rights over corridors of territory. For each section of 40, 80, or 120 miles built, depending on whether the land is easy, rolling, or terrible to cross, the Union hands over bonds. U.S. government bonds, set at a safe rate, 6%, heavy as ingots, solid as cannons. These bonds enter the company's coffers like promises of gold. And in addition to these papers that are as good as money, the state gives the land itself. For Union Pacific, about 12,800 acres per mile of track, alternating strips like a gigantic checkerboard of parcels on each side of the future ribbon of steel. Land is no longer just soil. It becomes collateral, raw material for speculation, a reserve of future value, the outline of a land empire. But this generosity is not a free gesture. The Civil War is consuming the country, 1861, 1865. Cannon fire is expensive. Troops demand uniforms, bullets, rations. The U.S. Treasury empties, then fills again, but with debt. Greenbacks are printed, those worryingly green notes. War bonds are issued. Taxes are invented. Citizens' pockets are turned inside out. To finance both the war and the major works, the government becomes a borrowing machine in its own right. In 1862, another act passes, less dazzling than the dream of the West, but just as decisive, the Income Tax Act. For the first time, federal income tax enters Americans' lives. A Bureau of Internal Revenue is born, a cold, stubborn body that pulls in regular flows. The state takes shape not only as a military power or guardian of the law, but as creditor, investor, master of the circuits of money. Its ability to support infrastructure multiplies. Taxation becomes a weapon, a key, a lever. In this new field, between the capital and the plains, the railroad companies emerge like private sovereigns. The Union Pacific Railroad Company is incorporated in 1862, a legal shell, then an organization of flesh, blood, and numbers. At its side, another, more mysterious entity takes shape, a future financial instrument, still discreet, which takes root in Pennsylvania under another name, the Pennsylvania Fiscal Agency. We will return to it. To build thousands of miles of track, the companies invent their own capital structure. They first issue common stock, pieces of paper that say, "You will be co-owner of the dream." New York bankers, New England industrialists, ambitious politicians, daring entrepreneurs, they all rush in, each with their own hope of dividends, prestige, power. Stock becomes a claim on the future, a link between today's money and tomorrow's trains. But shares are not enough. Then come the company bonds. They are guaranteed by what does not yet fully exist: the tracks to be laid, the rolling stock to be bought, the land to be exploited. These securities are sold to banks, institutional investors, lawyers, financial houses in Boston, New York, Philadelphia. They circulate as promises of regular, long-term income, tied to the rails that will one day cross the Rockies. A subtle weaving takes shape between public debt and private debt. The federal bonds handed to the Union Pacific do not remain in its coffers. The company resells them, converts them into cash. Each government bond becomes, once it is passed through a banker's hands, a flow of dollars to pay contractors, buy steel rails, bring in locomotives, clear the land, recruit workers. At the same time, Union Pacific issues its own bonds, often more expensive, with higher interest rates. State support does not cover everything. The rest must be absorbed by the markets. In this ballet, the banks play their part. Houses like J. Cook & Co., which distinguish themselves in financing the Northern Pacific, show the way, placing railroad bonds in every corner of the country, right into the parlors of investors in London and Frankfurt. From New York to Boston, from Philadelphia to the small towns of Ohio, an invisible network spreads. Railroad securities become the vein through which financial blood flows westward. Brokers, bankers, correspondents carry these papers like messengers of fortune. It is in this context, at the crossroads of capital needs and the thirst for conquest, that a singular creature appears, the Crédit Mobilier of America. Its first form is nothing spectacular. It is 1859. In Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Fiscal Agency is created, an investment company intended for all kinds of financial operations. A neutral, flexible tool, like a weapon still in its sheath, it is waiting for its role. In 1864, everything changes. War is raging, but the routes of the railroads are still being decided. A group of businessmen connected to Union Pacific see an opportunity in this legal shell. At their head, a man with a sharp gaze, Thomas C. Durant, Vice President of Union Pacific. At his side, two brothers from Massachusetts, Oliver and Oakes Ames, iron industrialists and Republican political figures. They buy it, reorganize it, rename it. The Pennsylvania Fiscal Agency becomes the Crédit Mobilier of America. The name rings out, French, elegant, inspired by the Crédit Mobilier de France, the great institution founded by the Pereire brothers a few years earlier. The European echo serves as finery. Through these words, insiders hear modernity, power, big capital. America dresses itself in a continental financial costume to better attract funds. It is no longer a simple agency, it is a vessel. Officially, the Crédit Mobilier of America presents itself as a construction and financing tool for Union Pacific, a construction company, an operational arm, a machine for raising capital and turning it into bridges, embankments, rails. To the eyes of Congress, investors, newspapers, everything seems logical. A concessionary company, Union Pacific, delegates the work to a specialist, the Crédit Mobilier, which takes contracts and carries out the projects. But behind this setup hides a sharper mechanism. Union Pacific, holder of the railroad concession, signs construction contracts with an entity that is, legally, distinct from it. On the surface, one pays, the other builds. In reality, the same men control both. The core group of Union Pacific shareholders also holds the reins of the Crédit Mobilier. They negotiate with themselves, in a windowless room, lump sum contracts. A fixed cost per mile of track, block by block, sum by sum. These prices far exceed the actual cost of construction. The Crédit Mobilier bills dearly, very dearly. Union Pacific agrees. The profit, the difference between the real cost and the billed price, settles into Crédit Mobilier's accounts, then flows up to its shareholders. The shareholders are, for the most part, the same executives who control Union Pacific. The circle closes. The public wealth that feeds the Union Pacific rises, like through a siphon, into a sister company. The rails are laid, but another, invisible line is traced, the line of financial transfers. To honor these contracts, the Union Pacific mobilizes everything the Pacific Railroad Act gives it. It takes the federal bonds, resells them, turns them into cash. It issues its own bonds, persuading investors that the great transcontinental line can only enrich those who finance it. It sells part of the land it received, mortgages the rest, turning acres into credit instruments, into collateral. Thus, the flow that leaves the federal government, bonds, land, passes through the Union Pacific, mixes with private debts, then slides toward Crédit Mobilier. There, it condenses into profits, dividends, distributions of shares. Public money becomes private profit, without any apparent break in legality, in a game of bookkeeping entries and contracts. The boundary between the world of business and the world of politics becomes blurred. The company directors do not content themselves with talking to elected officials. They are themselves elected officials. Oakes Ames is not only an industrialist. He sits in the House of Representatives for Massachusetts, an influential member of the Republican Party. Oliver Ames, his brother, takes over the presidency of the Union Pacific in 1866. They are men of iron and of law, both in the workshops and in the corridors of power. Around them gravitate other figures whose names are inscribed in the annals of the Republic. Schuyler Colfax, Republican from Indiana, Speaker of the House from 1863, soon to be Vice President. James A. Garfield, Representative from Ohio, future President. Henry Wilson, Senator from Massachusetts, also a future Vice President. All of them find themselves in one way or another in the orbit of the great railway project. Congress has a direct interest in this enterprise. It is their hands that vote on the laws extending subsidies and extending construction deadlines. It is Congress that decides whether new federal bonds will be granted, whether millions of additional acres will be delivered. Each line in a text, each paragraph modified, can strengthen or weaken the value of railway securities. The legislative power holds the keys to the company's fortunes. In this context, elected officials have more than a moral role. They have a financial stake. Access to shares, bonds, preferential terms becomes a silent privilege. The value of these securities depends directly on the decisions they themselves make, seated in the chamber. The markets react to their votes. A sentence in an amendment, and the value of a share climbs. A deadline extension, and a bond once considered doubtful regains its strength. Yet even this powerful system has its flaws, its breaking points. The construction overcharges imposed by Crédit Mobilier swell Union Pacific's debt. Every mile billed above a reasonable cost weighs like a stone on the balance sheet. Estimates, even at the time, show a clear, worrying gap between what a mile of track actually costs and what Union Pacific pays Crédit Mobilier. The dream is built on an excess. Union Pacific's indebtedness swells. On one side, the federal bonds, to be repaid one day to the Treasury, with interest. On the other, the private bonds issued to complete the construction work. Between the two, commitments contracted toward Crédit Mobilier and other contractors. The line is not yet fully in service. Traffic remains thin. Trains are rare. Travelers few. Revenues are not coming in fast enough. The weight of the debt crushes a ground still untouched by railcars. The risk of default, of bankruptcy, hangs like a storm over the plains. The long-term viability of Union Pacific is an open question. The company is betting on the future, on the flow of goods, on the herds, on the gold in the mountains, on the settlers, on the towns that will be born along the line. But in the 1860s, nothing is certain. The debt, however, is already there, cold, precise, dated. The financial relationships remain opaque. The construction contracts are not spread out in the light. The margins of Crédit Mobilier, the share distributions, the advantages granted to elected officials, all this is hidden behind technical reasoning, partial reports, incomplete balance sheets. Some documents are published out of obligation, but the heart of the mechanism remains in the shadows, in boardroom archives, private exchanges, tacit agreements. Yet the story does not end there, for the structure is not fixed. It unfolds, grows more complex, tightens like a bow. Between 1864 and 1873, Crédit Mobilier and Union Pacific will push these mechanisms to their breaking point. The financial arm becomes a double-edged sword. The scandal, first muffled, rises to the surface. Letters emerge, names circulate, newspapers publish. The New York Sun reveals the backstage dealings. Congress, compelled, investigates itself. In 1873, committees reconstruct the flows. They show how the money leaves the Treasury, runs to the Union Pacific, pours into Crédit Mobilier, then scatters into dividends, into shares distributed to elected officials. They identify culprits, pronounce censures, but criminal justice remains silent. The system, legal in its forms, morally dubious in its essence, slips through the chains of the law. Crédit Mobilier, branded by scandal, withers. Union Pacific, over-indebted, falters, goes through crises and reorganizations, up to later bankruptcies. Investors tally their losses. The Federal Treasury slowly recovers what it can. The country, however, keeps the rails. The trains run. America has its transcontinental. The price remains inscribed in collective memory. For the Crédit Mobilier affair becomes a symbol, a name that designates the dangerous embrace between the state and business, between public funds and private profits. Historians and journalists see in it one of the first great examples of Gilded Age corruption. They show how perfectly legal financial instruments, stocks, bonds, contracts, can be used to align the interests of elected officials and businessmen to the detriment of transparency. Debates open on the responsibility of representatives. How far can an elected official invest in a company that lives on the laws he himself votes for? Where is the line between private choice and conflict of interest? Society begins to understand that it is not enough to proclaim the republic for it to be virtuous. It must be protected. The relations between power and money must be regulated. From this affair spring doubts, but also reforms. The massive granting of land and bonds to railway companies recedes. Criticism shakes Congress. Large-scale subsidies, without sufficient oversight, are no longer taken for granted. The financing of railroads is gradually redirected toward private capital, toward the great investment banks, toward restructurings led by men like J.P. Morgan. Bonds no longer carry the government's direct guarantee with the same ease. They must find their value in the real profitability of the lines. Transparency requirements advance slowly. Publicly traded companies publish more reports. Regulators appear. In 1887, the Interstate Commerce Commission is created to monitor certain railroad abuses, to regulate rates, even if its origin is not a single scandal, but the accumulation of mistrusts. The shadow of Crédit Mobilier hangs over the debates like a warning. In the end, the financial logic laid bare by this story can be summed up in a few implacable questions. Who pays? Taxpayers first, who guarantee with their taxes the federal bonds. Private investors next, who buy the company's stocks and bonds, bearing the risk on their shoulders. How does the money circulate? From the Treasury to Union Pacific, through bonds and land. From Union Pacific to Crédit Mobilier, through inflated contracts. From Crédit Mobilier to its shareholders, through dividends, shares, capital gains. From banks and savers to Union Pacific, through the purchase of bonds, assuming the solvency risk. Who benefits from it? The executives and main shareholders of Crédit Mobilier and Union Pacific, who capture the profits during the construction phase. Certain elected officials, who receive shares at preferential prices and dividends, aligning their personal fortune with the prosperity of the scheme. And, paradoxically, in the long term, the nation, which gains decisive infrastructure for its expansion, despite the abuses, despite the losses. But what limits does this system encounter? Union Pacific cannot bear the burden of its debt indefinitely. Investors' confidence cracks. Public opinion discovers in flashes the murky game of the elites. Congress, forced into introspection, pronounces censures, initiates reforms. America understands that the railroad is not just a steel ribbon on the ground, but a path traced in the public conscience, where each mile laid also tells how the ties between the state, money, and the collective destiny are forged, twisted, broken. And while locomotives whistle in the night, casting their embers over the plains, another gleam, colder, begins to shine deep in people's minds. That of the question that always returns, century after century, project after project, scandal after scandal. When the state and capital move forward hand in hand toward the horizon, who is really holding the map? Who is really holding the compass? And who, in silence, settles the final bill?